The County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, April 23rd, 2018 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Tuma.
Here. Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Sharon.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Here. We have a quorum. Let the record reflect that Ms. Conwell, President Brady, and Ms. Baker are also in attendance.
Wow, that's great. Thanks for the additional attendees. And we have in your packet the minutes from the April 2nd, 2018 meeting. Is there a motion relative to those minutes?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from April 12th, 2018. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it, minutes are approved. There's no matters referred to the committee, so we come to our main event for the day, which is the discussion, the quarterly review of the Enterprise Resource Planning System, ERP. And before we start, I'd like to say two things. I just want to make everybody aware that the pit crew is meeting right here the day after tomorrow on Wednesday at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's the meeting of all the county change agents that are helping to facilitate the implementation. And I know that sometimes I learn more at pit crew than a lot of other places, so I would encourage it to anybody who's interested in learning more about our ERP implementation. And secondly, I just want to remind everyone how big an undertaking this is, and it's. I think we have a good perspective, not being involved directly in the implementation. We have the opportunity to observe and watch it from the outside, and I think we can make some positive contributions in that regard. But we should always keep in mind the perspective of the administration in the position of implementing one of the largest and most complex system implementations that we've ever had, and it's not to be expected that something of this magnitude would take place without any problems or issues along the way. I think what's important is that we identify those problems as early as possible, that we be willing to speak and deal about them and deal with them openly, that we make the mid-course corrections as necessary, and I'm confident that we can do those things, and that this system can have a positive impact on the operation of county government. So with that, I will call forward the administration to make the presentation of the Project Drive update.
Well, first I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, sir. You press the
Button.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Okay. Mr. Chief of Staff, welcome.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you for your comments, Mr. Chairman, putting this project into perspective. I've had the opportunity before to appear before this council as mayor, but this is my first time as chief of staff of the county. And people have often asked me to compare my experience as mayor with my experience as chief of staff of the county these past few weeks. I enormously enjoyed my job as mayor, but I always felt that it was a position that was filled with stress and challenges. But after 3 weeks at the county, where developments are proceeding so rapidly and where there is so much to be involved with, I've decided that my time as mayor was actually a very nice and quiet experience. What I wanted to do today was just provide a brief overview, and then others will provide the details. And what I'm going to talk about are goals, the Infor system, and also the current status of the project in general terms. The goals are extremely important. They are to gain efficiencies and speed in our workflow processes, to achieve long-term cost savings, to modernize our software and technology. I understand that some of our technology is circa 1988, 1993, so we want to bring it into the 21st century. And also, very importantly, to create a uniform software system across county operations, which we still don't have, with different departments and operations using different software. And this process will correct that and allow us to establish a uniform system across the county. The Infor system, Infor is a contractor who's providing us with a software system that's designed to accomplish the goals that I laid out. The team consists of John Sanguinetti, who's a project director, who is spending the great bulk of his time on this project. Don Buell, who's a project manager, and 8 to 16 consultants who are on site, the number differing depending on the day and the time. But it also includes our employees, our chiefs, our directors, because the key to success is really the interaction, as I'll explain, between our employees and the Infor personnel. So what is the process itself? What is the Infor process to achieve the goals that we've discussed? The Infor system begins by studying the as-is process, the workflow process in each area, and fully understanding what it is. And actually, as Infor explains it, they do a brown paper study, which means they actually take a large sheet of brown paper and actually outline the whole workflow process in each area, making sure everybody understands what it is. And there's agreement on what it is. And the reality is that sometimes it's a revelation to people to see how many steps there are in each process and how cumbersome it can sometimes be in terms of the numbers of manual steps. Once they have that process outlined and a consensus on what it is, they will then actually go through an electronic process using what they call standard flow charting tools to translate that process into an electronic form. So that is the second step, to take our as-is process and translate it into an electronic form. The third step is to analyze the as-is process and transform it into what they call a 2B process. 2B are the words they use, but what it means is to take the old process and transform it into a new process. And what the new process is to do is to eliminate steps and inefficiencies and change many of the manual steps to automated steps. Then, once they have the 2B process developed, they develop test scripts for users to test the process to assure that it is workable and achieving the goals. At that point, the fifth step is to go through a testing process, and this is where our departments and our employees are again heavily involved. Some key employees may be picked out in a given department to work with the Infor people on the testing process to make sure the process is working. We may need in a given department to actually backfill some of those positions so the normal work is being accomplished while they're going through the testing process. And once they've completed the testing process and are fully satisfied that the new process is working, that it's achieving its goals, then there will be a process to train the employees in the new process. Now, I want to talk also about the current status of the process. The current status basically is that we've had a change in management. Right now, the day-to-day management is being done by Michael Young and Jim Hay in the IT department. There is an executive steering committee that meets weekly. I've now been included on that. It's chaired by Matt Carroll and by Dennis Kennedy. At this point, we feel we're making good progress on the project, and it is within the budget, and you'll be hearing more about that shortly. We are working with Zig Berzens, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, of Zico, and in fact, there are going to be meetings with Zig and people from the administration this week to address some questions and issues that he has raised. We're looking for a project manager, not to start all over because this project is well down the road, but to, and not to take us back to square one, but actually to carry the momentum forward and build on what has been achieved so far. Most of all, today and in coming weeks and months, we want council to feel fully informed and to respond to any questions or concerns that you may have so that you feel as comfortable as possible with the process and how it's proceeding. At this point, I'm going to ask Matt Carroll, the co-chair of the Executive Steering Committee, to step forward and continue with the presentation.
Thank you very much. And before Matt Carroll begins, I'm going to ask my colleagues if anyone has any questions specifically for the Chief of Staff at this time. We can ask them also later yes, Ms. Baker and
Your
then
last,
Sean.
thank you, Chair. Your last comment about the project manager, has that always been something that we wanted to pursue? And, or is that in addition to what we have in place now, that was not expected earlier to bring on?
I think there's been a sense for a long time that we wanted to have a project manager. I think it's been part of the process from the beginning. We did have a project manager. We've changed management, but I think that has been a part, as I understand it, of the process from the very beginning. Is that not correct? Yeah.
Councilman Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back, Mr. Lycan, to the very first slide that you called up, which was goals, gains, gain in efficiencies for your first point, and long-term cost savings. If those are the two of the very first things you said, please tell me what the specific gains and efficiencies are that are now our targets, and please tell me the long-term cost savings specifically that are identified on this slide.
Well, the others are going to explain this in much more detail because obviously they've been more deeply involved for a much longer period of time. But in general terms, let me say that the gains and efficiencies are the elimination of steps that are unnecessary, the elimination of manual tasks that can be automated, and the gains in costs are the resultant cost savings that result from the elimination of all those steps, which require substantially more personnel in order to accomplish or achieve the current processes than would be necessary under a more automated process.
What you just described to me are both aspirational. Give me the specifics.
Well, I'm going to let the staff address that more specifically, but I know there's been a lot of interest from council in the question of ROI, return on investment. And we are working to provide you with detailed projections on that because I know how important that is to council. And so you will receive our projections. We are at a point where we'd like to do some extra work and fine tuning on that, but I know how critical that is, and we want you to have that. Now, if staff members want to speak to that in more detailed terms at this point, they're free to do so.
I will be a broken record on these 2 points. If they are your 2 top points, I always consider when somebody writes a slide and they put items like that to the very first 2 items, that you've already got definition to those 2 items, but it doesn't sound as though we have specific definitions. I will be just, whoever takes the microphone, Ms. Carroll or whoever, please be prepared to talk about the specific gains of efficiencies, not aspirational, as you described, which I think is nice to do, but the specific gains of efficiencies. What have you targeted? What is it going to be? What are the efficiencies, effectiveness? How is it going to be better servicing our customers? Because you're not trying to satisfy us. We just represent the taxpayers. I look at our job up here is we are strictly the voices of the taxpayers asking these questions. And what are the long-term savings? These are not my questions. These are the questions that you should be asking yourselves before we ever start on this project.
Well, we are asking
And we
ourselves
should have
those
these answers
questions.
in writing
Yeah.
on a piece of paper that we could be presenting to the taxpayers so they could see
Well,
what are the gains and where are the dollars.
I'm sure you will have that, and beyond that, as I say, the staff should feel free to address that question, but let me say that those are exactly the right questions, and that's exactly what we want to accomplish.
Well, then my third question is, your statement was, now we are making good progress.
Mm-hmm.
Please define now and what that good progress is so we can all celebrate that good progress when any speaker comes up and talks to us. Those are not my words, those are yours. Thank you.
Mr. Hay and Mr. Young will address that very point.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to acknowledge that Councilman Jones and Councilwoman Simon are now in attendance, so we have all committee members present. And I would call on Councilman Gallagher for the next question.
Okay, this was Mr. Lakin. Mr. Lakin, I'm taking it as though you're now leading this team, and I pray for you every evening.
Well, thanks, I appreciate your prayers.
I was a lifeguard and I hated swimming, but I see you drowning here. And you're familiar with Zig's
Yes.
monthly. I don't think it's fair to you to ask you the questions that I have, so I'm going to put them in writing. and it's basically for the team, so I'll have that to you this week. My concerns are the anomalies and the concerns that he raises within his report. I see him as a valuable piece of making this thing turned around and making it right. But what I will request from you is that on the Infor, they have consultants, 8 to 16 consultants, and anybody on our team. I think we need to know who these people are and their qualifications. So if you get the resumes to anybody that touches anything regarding this project, we should know who they are and what their personal expertise is that they bring to this. So if you can get that, and that includes the team on the executive side, we need to know who's running the show here. Because the problem from the immediate past was the fellow that we then found out was running the entire show, maybe is the reason that we're in the predicament that I see as a predicament that we're in. So all those folks that are involved, we need to know who they are, what their position is, what their background is, and what skill they bring to the ERP, and especially the consultants that are on board. Because a consultant's a consultant's a consultant. I would like to be able to know every evening as I go to bed that the consultants that we have done ERPs in the past. We don't know that yet, and I'd hate to find that out. And again, with Zig's report, I think if you start paying attention, I know you have, if the team pays attention to the concerns that he has raised, the anomalies that he has raised, that we're going to have a better feel for where we're going and how we're going to get there. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. And that's all I have. I just don't think it's
Okay.
fair to pile on you at this point in time, being you've only been here a couple weeks. So I'll have that to you by the end of the week.
Okay.
But I think these are important things that we need to know. Thank you.
Well, that's one thing I am used to from being a mayor, the piling on, so don't worry about it too much. But let me say this, we are meeting with Zig this week. I know he has concerns. There will be extensive meetings. I think there's a need for even greater communication between Zig and the people who are running the project currently. Will be doing that. Finally, I want to say, we do want you to sleep peacefully at night and not worry about the ERP. So that's our goal, and that's where we're trying to get.
Well, Mr. Chairman, quite honestly, we weren't worrying about the ERP, and that's why I don't sleep easy at night, is because things were happening we didn't know about. So I think now we're responsible now to know more about what's going on and to be somewhat of a guiding hand in this situation. We're in this situation not because of this council, but because of the direction that it originally had. And quite honestly, my concern is many of the people on the team knew this was going on. And if they didn't know it was going on, they shouldn't be on the team. So we would like to get to a point of comfort. And like I said, I'll give you those in writing. Okay. I think it's unfair to be jumping you right now.
All right, thank you. And that's where we want to go to.
Ms. Baker?
Thank you, and I didn't get a chance to follow up on my question for the project manager. And as with Councilman Gallagher, if you could because project manager is a pretty big position. I'm not sure who is in place now in the interim, but whoever we hire, I'd like to know when they're hired. Are they long-term? Are they here afterwards? Or is it just for the project until it's completely launched? And is it included in the current budget? So those questions,
We'll be
yes.
responding to all those questions.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Chair.
one more question for the chief of staff from me, Chief Lakin. My question is, and this is a broad conceptual question, so it should fit within your knowledge of it. How would the work that the project managers do, that person's duties and responsibilities, how would that differ from the day-to-day work being done by Mike Young and Jim Hay, and also different from the position of leading the steering committee being done by Matt Carroll and Dennis Kennedy?
The project management work is effectively being done right now by Mike Young and Jim Hay. So the new project manager would take over many of those responsibilities, although it's going to be important for for the new project manager to interface with them. Because, as I said, we want to build on the project we have now, and we're all working together to get to the goal. And then your second question was, what was your second question?
There was just one question.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
So would I be correct in
Oh,
saying
the
that,
oversight. The steering committee is providing oversight and broad direction.
would I be correct in saying that the project manager would be doing the same things that Mike Young and Jim Hay are doing, but would also bring a greater level of coordination and strategic handling of the whole thing conceptually, rather than just a day at a time?
Well, some of that is going to need to be addressed because, as I say, we're not starting at the beginning with a project manager starting from scratch. But what we want to do is have the project manager take over a number of things they're doing, so they're free to do other tasks. The new manager can focus on this project exclusively. And what we want to do is achieve a situation where they work together.
Okay, thank
Okay?
you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to call on Matt Carroll, and the slide presentation is relatively brief as these things go, and so I'm going to ask if we could allow Mr. Carroll to complete his presentation. Please jot down your questions as we go along, and then we'll hopefully have a good amount of time for question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I do have just a couple of brief slides that I'll cover, and then I'll be turning it over to Michael Young and others to speak to a little bit more of the details. So today we're going to cover the project schedule to give you any updates on what's happened with the schedule, a little bit more on budget, and then some detail today on how the system is already working and some of the activity that's ongoing. This, in a general sense, our report today references the monthly report our first monthly report that was submitted that has a good amount of detail in it. I think Michael and possibly others are able to try to address some of those specific questions and what is a pretty detailed document, but he's able to address questions related to that, even though it's not part of our slides per se. I will just point out too that as Earl mentioned, the Chief of Staff mentioned, we're working, I think, very collaboratively with Zig Berzins, both from our end and from his end. We looked very closely at the report that he put out, the long slide presentation I think you all received. We were quite interested in the details of what he said. So those discussions I know have already happened. And Zig attends our weekly executive steering committee meetings, and he has regular meetings with the rest of us very frequently as well. So that is a good communication system that's set up. Just so those are the main points I'll be talking about. Just briefly, so again, a little bit about governance. So I think Earl has covered that and the questions have addressed that. A little bit about the execution of the project, so some launches that have taken place already, and then more on the schedule. Of course, the budget, we're trying to provide a more meaningful description of what the budget looks like and how we're forecasting. And then at the end, to Councilman Schron's point, Michael Young, I think, can talk a little bit about our return on investment analysis. It does not provide the detail that you're requesting, Councilman, but it is, at least we can give you some idea of how close we are and when we plan to have something that's more detailed for you. So that'll be the end of this presentation. Just a little bit on governance. Again, I think you've heard most of this. We have changed the charter a little bit. So as you heard, Dennis and I are the co-chairs of the group, the Executive Steering Committee. Douglas Dykes and Michael Dever, who are the leads, obviously, of the two departments that are extremely involved outside of Dennis in the process. Michael Young, and then a variety of others affiliated with the project. Infor participates. I mentioned that Zig Berzins participates as well. And that's a weekly meeting, and Earl is also part of that group now. So that's our overall structure of the governance. Again, organizational chart shows you, you'll see the different roles. And to that point, if you need more details, Councilman Gallagher mentioned about staff or about what their experience is, obviously can provide all that information, resumes of who's here now, who's coming in. That's easy to do, and also show exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. We have some project roles that people are working on, and some other staff that are busy with their regular jobs and the ERP that we're trying to backfill so they can continue to do all the work that they need to do. It's always a challenge filling various roles, so we need outside resources. I think to an earlier question, Michael Young and Jim Hay are heavily involved in the running the project now, but of course Michael Young, as the Chief Technology Officer, has a lot of other duties. Also implementing another really significant system in real property, so we definitely need additional resources at certain points to back up the system. We are just, this council, appreciate, approved our TPA contract for RMS. They're starting officially today, so they are on site working with us. I expect they'll work closely with your TPA, ZIG as well. That's an expectation that I think a lot of value will be added from those two parties, those two resources working together. But that's pretty much just a quick update on governance and on the structure. I'm going to turn it over to Michael Young, and I think Michael Dever is going to talk a little bit about the launch in Public Works. And then Michael Young will get into the schedule and some other details. So,
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dev will be here shortly. The first thing we want to touch on is the EAM rollout. We've had 3 successful launches, so I'd like Mike to touch base on a little bit about those and some of the benefits we've seen thus far.
All right, good morning, or should I say good afternoon, members of council. Michael Dever with the Department of Public Works. So the last time I was before you, we had there was the announcement of the launch of the EAM component of the ERP, which was back on March 19th. That's when we had the dispatchers down at the sanitary unit started inputting the work orders into the system. And then in turn, those work orders then were distributed out to the staff in the field. When we started the first day, we ended up doing roughly 45 work orders. That first week we ended up doing roughly 45 work orders in the system. I'm happy to report that just this past Monday, a week ago, we then engaged the supervisors in the EAM, or the work order system. And so the supervisors and the dispatchers are now both utilizing the equipment. But since March 19th, we've done roughly 3,000 work orders, or 3,000 work orders have been generated via the sanitary group. So the team is latched onto it, and it's going very well. Over the next few weeks here, we are going to be implementing then the next phase of this, which will be our TV crews. As many of you know, the sanitary group is made up of TV crews, house crews that service the individual houses if there's a flooding or anything that takes place. We have a jet crew that basically cleans the main lines out in the street. We have a pump station crew that takes care of our 50 pump stations throughout the county. So those work orders are what come to those guys, and they end up turning them around and maintaining the system for those 40 communities we represent. The whole intent of the ERP when we were very supportive of moving forward with the project was the EAM. We felt like we were going to see an increase in our work productivity of our manpower. And we're anticipating that we will see a 20% improvement of productivity with our manpower. And the reason for is now you have real-time information. As a work order is generated, it then goes to whatever respective group. Immediately, they're able to look at it, they're able to provide service to it. So ultimately, we're going to be seeing a 20% increase in productivity is what we anticipate once this is fully implemented. Keep in mind, the financial component hasn't been implemented yet, either as the HR component. So when we are fully implemented, which we're anticipating towards the end of this year, early in 19, then we'll start to see those savings. But just that we're currently using the work order system has been a huge plus for our staff. Michael, I don't know, is there something else you'd like to?
No, just the other thing I'd like to add, Mike, is as part of those waves in the latter part of the summer, a big step for Mike's team is that we're going to be introducing mobile technology to them. Now, these are folks that are all paper-based individuals. So if you think about how long it takes a piece of paper to get from a truck into the office to get processed, all of those things are going to be gradually going away throughout the course of the summer. By the end of the summer, I think we're going to have about 80 tablets out in the field in Mike's team. So now what that does is everything that was now paper-based is now going to be all real-time, as Mike had suggested earlier. And if you think of just the time efficiencies and the amount of productivity and not having to wait for this piece of paper to get processed before they go to the next thing, all of those are work productivity efficiencies that we're going to gain by introducing all of this technology into his area.
The tablets themselves are going to be coming online next week. Right now, the dispatchers are using their desktop computers. The supervisors are utilizing their tablets that they currently have. The TV crews have desktop computers within the vehicles right now. So the tablets are being programmed as we speak right now, and we're anticipating to have those mid next week.
Right, for the first wave.
For imaging. So those 40 tablets will be coming our way shortly also.
Right. And I think the last 40 goes in for roads and bridges at the end of June.
That's right.
So, okay. Any questions for Mike and Public Works for EAM?
I'd like, if we could, to hold questions till we complete the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
When we met on April 2nd, we had laid out the modified schedule for the three primary branches, Public Works, Human Resources, and Fiscal. Those are also in the monthly report that we provided last week, and they're restated here. There hasn't been a change in the schedule since we presented it, since Matt and Dennis presented it on April 2nd. So as we talked about with EAM, some of the large successes that we're going to see out throughout the course of the summer will come to fruition, with facilities being the last that'll come in towards the latter part of September. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. There we go. Human Resources, led by Douglas and the team. That is currently on schedule as we laid out on April 2nd, with the majority of the components delivered by the end of this calendar year. Then from Fiscal, the primary components when we talked to you back in early April, we moved out until the beginning of September. That is still on track, with some of the other items that are still in discussion, that potentially with contract management getting moved out till March of next year to get it out of the critical path of some of these other primary components.
Okay, now I think we'll take a break before we get on to budget and see if anybody has any questions about the scheduling. Okay.
Where are we going to budget? My questions might be more budget related.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Brown.
My question is, as we transition from paper to software, can you give us an idea of how much typing is required versus drop-down menus? Because my concern, in a way, is with our SACWIS system, which is used for Children and Family Services. There's a lot of typing required, which causes some backup in that process. So have we identified some things that can make drop-downs more prevalent than having to manually type information?
Yeah, the old SACWIS application was kind of an old 3270 mainframe-based application, so drop-downs didn't really exist back in 1980, whenever that thing was written. The technology that they're developing here is more drop-down savvy, click and point, pre-fill in the blank, so there's less keying that goes on. If you want, we can have some of the specific lines that have actually gone through the development to give you a better idea of what those exactly are, but it would be different by line.
I would at your convenience or mutually convenient time be honored to be able to see, privileged to see that system. So thank you.
Councilman Tron.
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving us a percentage, a target, 20% manpower improvement. I think that's refreshing to hear that. Let me translate that into at least what I think I heard. 3,000 work orders were issued from basically the month that went live. What was your target?
Target work orders for
Yeah,
that?
how many, you gave us 3,000 were done in the month. What was your target in anticipation? How many do you usually do in a month? How many is your go forward ultimate target in there? So,
Right.
I mean,
So-
were you doing regularly 5,000 a month, or were you regularly doing 1,000 a month before this 1 month period?
Actually, 3,000 is the number since the March 19th date. Okay?
Right, I understand that.
So, backing up from that then, we roughly do 2,500 work orders a month. Once again, until this is fully implemented, that's when I anticipate to see that 20% savings. So be it the financial component and those others. But you're right, the numbers are very similar to what we're currently doing. But I think it's right now we're developing that base of how much it takes to go and clean a section. They call it a segment of sewer. From manhole to manhole is called a segment. So what is the time frame it takes to do that type of work, a light cleaning? And that's what this is developing our base that we're going to go from here and compare ourselves really against private industry.
No, if your records show you were doing 2,500 a month prior to this period of time, and you now did 3,000, that is exactly 20%. 20% of 2,500 is 500. That would put you right on target if that was your target and your objective. So I'm thrilled to hear. And the 40 target tablets you're going to have should do nothing but improve that to where ultimately you're going to get to the second point, which is the cost savings, which is the budgetary item that will be discussed next, which obviously you know where my conversations are going to go if you get a 20% efficiency and effectiveness out there.
I think it's good to note also that the councilwoman that just asked about the tablet and how it'll be utilized. It is all drop-down items on the screen, so it is really user-friendly. Right now, they are using a sheet of paper and they're just filling it out, but it has all drop-down items on it, so I think it's very user-friendly, and we've been working with our bargaining units in regards to it, what's coming forward, and we've got support from them also.
And I'm sure ultimately you're going to find that you have a lot of repetitive tasks that are done that you can be dropping and clicking on those repetitive tasks and moving them forward, and they will pre-format almost all or for an awful lot of your activities.
I agree.
Thank you.
Ms. Baker.
From what I've talked with our consultant, and I'm sure you'll probably agree, but just to reinforce it, the most, I don't want to say easier, but the most difficult time is when we start getting into the fiscal and HHS. The going from manual to a laptop or mobile is probably easier to understand and easier to implement because they're going from manual. But when you start to implement from one computer system to another and then incorporate that with what you're doing now with Public Works, that's where the challenges really start to enter in. Am I correct about that?
Well, yes. Right now, the guys in the field are just tracking the hours and time that they're spending. There's not much fiscal pieces to that now. That information ultimately is going to be generated to the back office, so it turns around, and those communities that we direct bill to will be able to send to them accurate information on job specific, this is what it costs to do it. So it will be more challenging, but it'll be more on the back office side of how it's going to play out. So I'm very optimistic, and I think the crew is anxious and they're very excited about it. I could, if Zig was here, I'm sure he would even attest that there is a lot of support down at the sanitary group on how this thing has been rolled out and working.
Good to know. Thank you.
Okay, please continue.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Okay, in regards to the budget, in the last 7 weeks since we've come on board, we've been working to revamp the financial model to make it much more transparent and expand to include much more detail, forecasted costs month over month. In the monthly report that we had sent out, we completed the forecasting model so that we have estimated forecasts throughout the course of this year, along with all the expenditures out that we're projecting through 19, though we haven't gotten to the monthly forecasting model through 2019 as of yet. On the next slide is a high-level overview of where we're sitting in regards to each one of those expenditures by line. I don't believe that was at this level of detail prior to us getting introduced a month or so ago. We're going to continue to expand on that so that there aren't any questions pertaining to the budget and where any of those expenditures are going. You'll see that the actuals to date are current through the month of March, and we're at the point now where all of the actuals are on track month by month. Just kind of high-level overview of what the second quarter looks at a glance. In case you have any questions of any of the specifics, our budget analyst is here to field any of the detailed questions if you have anything pertaining to those. Okay. In regards to the return on investment, we've been working with the 3 different lines of business to get a financial and a productivity model built. We're well on our way with 2 out of the 3. The third one is still a work in progress. It's our anticipation that we'll have a complete model for all of the business lines presented to council during our May presentation, our monthly report for the month of May. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, and Ms. Conwell is first.
Thank you, Chair, to Mr. Brown. Overall cost of the different departments, out of the $25 million total that this project is going to cost, is there a breakdown of how much will be utilized of that $25 million for Public Works, for HR? Are you keeping track of that?
No, I don't believe we're tracking it down. We can, but we're not tracking it down by line. Right now, we're tracking it by individual project component. So, Public Works, as an example, has, make it up a dozen different project lines for the overall project. So each one of those is being tracked. We could roll that up to by line, but then you'll be missing some of the overall governing components that go on top of the entire layer. But we are tracking to the $25 million.
Okay. At the end of the project, you might not be keeping track of it now, but at the end of the project, because Public Works is kind of first. So I guess my overall thought is, how do we keep track of that $25 million and what is left as we move on throughout the phases?
Yeah, what you'll see in the detailed reporting that we provided, we have everything laid out now by month, and even the forecast by month for each of the different areas that we're tracking. So you'd be able to look at that level of detail to see where all the spend is going from, any of the licensing, any of the consultants, staff aug, any of the contingency spend, and all of that is detailed now in the budget report.
Okay, what's that contingency again?
You got me. I don't know what the remaining number is, but I think it was 600,000 remaining. No,
We just got the report.
2.5 million.
Okay, 2.5. Thank you.
Councilman Tron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on my councilwoman's questions in regards to the spend side, and you indicated that the overhead piece is a little harder to track because it's getting layered against Public Works and things of that nature.
No, it's not harder. It could get she's asking for specific by business line.
Right.
And some of the details that cross all of the lines wouldn't necessarily be broken down by line.
Okay, but you'd have an overhead cost, which is what you're alluding to,
Yeah.
and then you're gonna have a specific cost that's gonna relate to Public Works and to all the HR department and everything like that. So you're applying the overhead in some way based on hours against each individual department, or
No,
how are you applying that?
Every contract line, every spend is actually detailed out in the report. And if we can actually set up a separate meeting, like with our budget analyst, we could actually go through every one of those lines and every dollar that's been spent, every change order, every invoice, it's all being tracked.
Okay, but you're gonna have an overhead cost, which is what you're talking about right now.
No, by overhead, there are things that encompass the entire project. When the councilwoman was asking about, can I give a specific cost to the overall cost for public works? It would not include the governing items that actually cost, that go across the entire line, like all the environmentals for the hosting go across the entire line. They aren't broken down by business model.
Okay, I guess I would look at that as being an overhead that's gonna get applied against every one of the departments to some way, either as a percentage of the hours that are going against public works, or some way you're gonna allocate that cost. That's gonna be a general cost, and then you're gonna come down to specific items for the installation. And I can see Mr. Davis is nodding his head, so he knows his department's gonna get pinged with some kind of a cost out there, both an overhead piece and an operational piece. I would like, back to my councilwoman's, to know and track what is getting applied to each one of those departments. Lump all the general costs together so we can see where those are going. But let's see how we're applying the specific cost to each one of these, because ultimately we're going to be coming back and asking what the chief of staff's two specific points were: gain and efficiency, dollars saved. Those are not my points, those are his, and he indicated that we would hear from the subsequent speakers. Well, we did hear from one. I'm still looking to hear what those goals are as far as efficiency that we're looking to do. We heard that we're going to hear 20% efficiency improvement by the time we get fully implemented in December, early January. I think for Mr. Devers were the timelines. We're going to hold that accountable, that we're going to see that 20% efficiency. And I can only hope that we're going to hear those same kind of comments from every subsequent speaker, whether it's an HR speaker, whether it's coming into whatever department, that we're going to hear some kind of, because those are the goals from the chief of staff, not from us. So gains of efficiency and dollars saved. And then ultimately, we're going to hear some overhead costs. The 515 that we just approved the other day, where is that going?
That was for the third-party consultant that's here today, RSM.
Okay, is that already embedded in these numbers?
Yes.
Okay, and then the cost of the project manager, is that embedded, or is that in lieu of the project manager that was here before? Or that's,
It's going to be kind of in lieu, but it's built into all the staffing costs for that additional person.
okay, so that person will be addition. The 515 you're saying was not additional, that was always anticipated?
The 515 for the third-party consultant, we were budgeted for 600, it came in at 515.
Okay, so that was always part of.
That was always budgeted.
Always part of the 25 million.
Right, and that other position that we're referring to has always been part of the staffing line.
But that staffing person is still here, is it not?
That one has been, yes. She's
Okay,
still
so
here.
we have an additional staffing person that we're looking for currently as far as the project.
There was additional project management headcount in the staffing model already.
Okay, so that person was always anticipated in the 25 million.
Yes,
So right now, we should not be a penny over 25 million with anything you've told us.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's a good segue. My question, I'm gonna, if I may, I'm gonna segue, and then I'll
You're the
put you down
chair.
for next.
Thanks, Council.
My segue is that Councilman Sean was talking about all the installation costs, the contractors, the vendors, the ERP staff that are involved in the process of installing the system, as opposed to the ongoing operation after it's installed. And my question is when we add up all those project costs that we've identified so far, how close does that get us to 25 million?
The way that the budget's laid out, we're right on track for the 25 million with whatever's going to be remaining from the contingency when the project's over. We're not forecasting any project overheads or overruns.
So, and how much of that 25 million is contingency?
2.5 million.
So the hard costs that you've identified so far are 22.5 million, and you have 2.5 million contingency. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, Ms. Simon.
Sorry to almost take away your segue. The project manager question, I want to go back to that. So we had somebody who's going to be replaced, and the money that we had budgeted is there for the new project manager to come in?
Correct.
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear what the anticipated wait time was to get the new project manager.
I can't give you a date. We're interviewing. We had a really strong candidate that had to back out last Friday due to personal reasons that we were going to extend to.
So right now, we have two teams, you and Mr. Hay, handling that aspect of the job. And I understand that one of the individuals isn't here 5 days a week physically. How is that impacting the ability to run the project?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Oh.
Everybody's here 5 days a week.
Everybody's, both interim people are here 5 days a week?
Everybody's here 5 days a week.
Serious? Okay, good. And the project manager that was here is still being paid someplace else in the county, right?
Yeah, she's working with Douglas to assist him in driving the HR branch of the project.
Okay, so that's a different budget, right?
No,
That's an HR, it's still part of this?
It's still all part of it. All the staff associated with the ERP project is funded out of ERP. So that hasn't changed.
Okay, no matter where they are. So we're not adding staffing level increase in what we originally budgeted, it's just all
the
been
staffing-
anticipated?
All the staffing lines are on track.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I have some additional questions, but I'm going to go to Ms. Baker first.
All right, and just understanding the forecasting for the budget overview, and we were talking about contingencies of 2.5 and where the money's coming from in order to fulfill the 25 million. The numbers that are there for the forecast of 18 and the forecast of 19, the differences that are there from the original budget, is that what's making up now the contingency? For example, the original consulting services in the budget was 11.2, but now we are looking at 7.5. The backfill was 1.5, we're now at a little over 500,000, and the software is 3.1, where we were at 5.1. The ERP is at 3.9, which is over the ERP support for 3.1. And then, of course, we have the program needs that was not budgeted, of 1 million. But if you were to go back and forth and try to decipher where the savings is that what's comprising our contingency now?
No, you're just using the ERP support as an example. When you look at what's budgeted for the overall $25 million project is the 3.1. What our expected spend in 18 is 1.5. What our expected spend in 19 is 2.4, which makes up the 3.1.
You're on the software line?
No, I was referring to the ERP support line, just using that one as an example. But it would lay out the same way for the software support. The software licensing and whatnot is budgeted for 5.1, and as the spending to date goes through, 17 was 1.5, 18 is 1.5, 19 is projected to be 1.6, and that rolls into the 5.1.
So the actuals to date is not included in the forecast?
No, the actuals to date is like it's just through 17.
Right.
And then we have actuals month to date in March, which you see there, which we've only had to spend 28 so far. And then the rest of our projected forecast in that particular line for the rest of this year is 1.5.
I didn't read it that way. Okay, let me take a second look, thank you.
Okay, on the budget page.
Oh, Chair, can I just ask, then going back to my contingency, where does the contingency come from? Our original contingency was 2.7, and we're still at 2.5. That means we have, for the most part,
Some of the funding for the contingency went with some of the change orders where they took some functionality out of the project, and then they took the savings associated with that and rolled it into what they're referring to as Phase 99.
came from the savings. I'm sorry, Chair, go right ahead. Didn't to
okay.
interrupt.
Where it has budget available for other program needs in the 2018 forecast, 1,067,000. Is that money in addition to the contingencies that has not yet been programmed and is available as needed?
Correct. The way the budget was being done prior, anything that got freed up, we dumped into contingency. So what we did is we retracted and pulled that out to track it separately. So contingency is contingency, so if there was a reduction somewhere else, it would just roll into the 1 million that's reflected there.
So we actually have 3.5 million or so it's actually 3.6 million that hasn't been programmed yet, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. You said that by the May monthly report that you're expecting us to provide the results of the detailed analysis of benefits of the project.
Correct. We've been working with the three business lines to get that built, and we're very close to being done with 2 out of the 3, and the third one we expect to be done by the end of May.
My question is, when that report is issued, will that enable us to answer the question of when we get it installed and we've been running it for a while and we're no longer running 2 systems at once, how much will the annual cost savings be? Will that analysis enable us to answer that question?
I'll say generically yes, because it's a combination of hard savings and then productivity improvements, which in turn, as Mike was saying, allows him to get more done, which has an added value to it. So there'll be hard savings and soft savings that'll be associated to the proposal.
Okay. Next question is that I've heard talk that we're in the process of developing an alternative document management system. Can you explain that problem and how we're dealing with it and what you expect the cost of it to be?
I can't tell you what the cost is going to be because we're still evaluating what all the different options are. From staying where we're at to doing a full-blown replacement. So we're still going through the analysis.
Am I correct that we don't have any RFP or anything like that out in the field on that yet at this time? Is that correct?
No, it's written and it's sitting until we finish doing the analysis with the internal staff, the chief of staff, before we decide whether or not we're going to publish.
Other questions from my colleagues?
I just have a follow-up.
Okay,
Just for
fine.
clarification, so you're saying that all employees working on the ERP project are here physically 5 days a week?
No, some of the Infor team, as an example, works remotely, and that's via the contract.
Okay, so via contract, there's remote work on ERP. And does that impact the ability to have the project move forward in a timely manner? That was my
No, and
original question.
it's actually a savings, because now we're not having to deal with travel costs and any of the delay when you catch people on the road.
Okay, for now.
Schwan and then Conwell.
Well, we're honing in on ideas of savings and costs. If we cap it out at 25 million, which I'll still be a little bit from Missouri on that number, but hopefully you'll be there. At what point will this actually cover that cost of the savings to cover the $25 million expense? What's the payback in years?
I don't have that. I'd have to go back.
Is
and
that a
research
target number that makes sense? You're a business guy, you've been oriented to these kind of questions before. This is not an illogical question, I don't think, as far as what's the number of dollars that we should be savings over the number of years in order to pay back for an expenditure of this nature. Is that back to the Chief of Staff's goal, efficiency, goal, savings? That's a number you can come up with as far as, we anticipate this is a 6-year payback, a 9-year
Correct.
payback.
Yeah, when you look at the hard costs and the soft costs, you can amortize when we're gonna be in the black.
Right, you give it, yep, you got it, that's my
I got it.
simplistic way to go back to the taxpayer and say, we're getting ready to spend, not getting ready, we are long down the path of spending, having spent, we hope, no more than $25 million, and you will get a payback. The flip point is going to be at year, and I'd love you to give me that number.
Yeah, the other thing too that we need to communicate to them is the ability to deliver services faster, because that has a meaning to them as well.
Yeah, and I thoroughly accept that as part of the payback. If we are going to do public works 20% faster, and that comes at an hourly rate of, I'll just pick a number, 125, 150 bucks an hour, which I figure is probably the range of what a public works hour costs us. That's a really easy quantifiable thing that we can go back to the taxpayers and say, this is where the benefit comes from. You're going to get your sewer lines cleaned and fixed and repaired so much faster because we're going to now do it 20% faster. We're either going to service more communities or we're going to do it at a lower cost to them in regards to how we provide that service. And it'll run all the way through every service, whether it's providing support for HR, providing support for our human resources areas out there. So I hope that we'd be able to do that.
Okay.
And give us a target, give us an actual date on the map. And I don't care whether it's a range saying we'll pay back in 7 years to 9 years or whatever happens to be, but something we can live with.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Mr. Brown, to go back to my original question, and it kind of falls in line with Councilman Schron. So not only just for a breakdown of the details of the costs for each department, but I think in turn it can also show us over time, after it's over, what are the savings
Right.
from each of those
Yeah,
departments?
the model, like, for example, the one we're working on with Douglas has, day one, whatever day one is, here's the annual buyback that he's gonna save, right? So I think we're gonna be able to give you that information.
Thank you.
And at previous sessions of this committee, we've talked about the difficulty of hiring the internal staff that are going to work on this project, and it's been presented that several people, we liked them, but we weren't offering enough money, and they said no, and we didn't get them hired, and so on. My question is, in the last quarter, since we had our last update, have we hired any additional ERP implementation staff, and how many people are we at currently in terms of that staffing, and how does that compare with where we would like to be?
I'll break it down into two different areas. We have the day-to-day project management group, which is made up of a variety of different skill sets. We're up to lacking one person at this point in that entire group. We've engaged Infor to bring in a resourcing team to help us with that. They're interviewing that individual, which we feel very strongly about, on Wednesday, and then that side of the house will be completely staffed. I'd have to give you the actual raw numbers. I don't recall what those are off the top of my head. On the technology side of the house, it wasn't as quite a large a rush to get those in place. We needed to focus on the project management group first. We had somebody start actually today, and we still have 3 more in that area to fill.
Any other questions by my colleagues? We have the council president and Conwell.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, a little while ago, a little earlier, you mentioned that part of the way we were able to save some money was to remove some functionality out of the project, and I was wondering if you could just give me a better idea what that means or what that was.
It was prior to my arrival, so I would have to get you that from the Infor group. But it was agreed upon that there were certain things that were in the original RFP that wasn't required after they came in and started doing the analysis. So they excluded those things and returned that money back into the overall budget of the project. But I can get you the actual specifics.
Thank you.
Ms. Conwell?
Through the chair to Mr. Brown. Councilman Miller asked you how many new staff and were hired and how many do we have overall? Is this information going forward, because this is stuff that we should know, this information going forward, are you going to keep, is this the kind of information you're going to keep ZIG?
Yeah, he has a copy of the organizational chart which reflect by function who they were, where the openings were, and he has all that information.
Okay, so he'll keep us updated. Thank you.
Anything else? Well, before we close, I'd like to run down the list of information requests that we have, and I'm sure that Trevor McAleer will detail it and catch anything if I missed anything. But we want to know who the staff are that are working on implementing the ERP project and their qualifications, both internally and on the Infor side. And we want to know when the project manager is hired and what that person's qualifications are. We would like to know how costs of the system will be allocated to various departments. We would like to know what the payback period in time is. In other words, how long will it take us to save $25 million? We want to know what the internal staffing numbers are. In other words, how many people do we have internally working on the ERP project, and what positions remain to be filled. And finally, as the council president requested, we'd like to know what functionalities were eliminated when we did the change order. So that's what I have, and I would point out that this Thursday we have the work session with our own consultant. So I think that's at 10 o'clock in the morning. Is that correct? 10 o'clock. Yes, and so I would invite all council members to please come and participate in that. That's an important part of our process. And the next quarterly review is already scheduled. That will be on Monday, July the 16th. And in the meantime, we will be very interested in receiving your monthly reports, and we will ask you questions to follow up on those as they arise. So with that, anything else before we close? Ms. Conwell.
Just wanted to ask you, I believe, Mr. Chair, that someone stated earlier, it might have been Chief Lycan, that they're going to have a meeting with ZIG, so when he presents to us, he'll be updated when he presents to us on Thursday. They're going to have a meeting in between there. I think that's what was stated.
We meet with ZIG.
Okay, I'm seeing the yeses in the back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we meet with them often, so.
Yes, they will be in close touch with ZIG. Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate all the information that was provided. And I would ask if there is any miscellaneous business. Hearing none, one other thing that people can mark on their calendars, it is the third Wednesday in May. I think that is the 19th. That's when we're going to be doing the first quarter update of the county's finances. That's always a very important event, so mark that down. That's our next meeting of finance and budget. I don't think the committee will be meeting before then. There being no further business that commands our attention, We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.